Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now about 8 days after saying these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up to the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking about his exodus, which he was about to fulfill in Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but as they awoke they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us set up 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not realizing what he was saying. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. On the next day, when they had come down from the mountain, a great crowd met him. Just then a man from the crowd shouted, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son. He is my only child." Suddenly a spirit seizes him, and all at once he shrieks. It convulses him until he foams at the mouth. It mauls him and will scarcely leave him. I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and put up with you? Bring your son here." While he was being brought forward, the demon dashed him to the ground in convulsions. But Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And all were astounded at the greatness of God. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. And all were astounded at the greatness of God. The people who witnessed Jesus' healing were awestruck. They were amazed at God's greatness found in Jesus. And as we just read, this takes place immediately following Jesus' transformation on the mountaintop with Peter, John, and James. Peter, John, and James were so awestruck, it put them to sleep. Seeing the glory of God revealed in the transfiguration brings mystery and wonder to the forefront. It reminds us that we don't have all the answers about God and faith. And it encourages us to take in the moments of awe, not because they provide all the answers, but because in them we get a glimpse of God. We get to see God closer and feel as if that veil is lifted, if only for a moment. There are many things in life that try to take us away from God or distract us from God's greatness. And Transfiguration Sunday is the perfect time to be reminded of beauty and awe and celebrate God's goodness. Today, the journey through this season of Epiphany ends, and on the mountaintop, we look back over the past 2 months. Today is also the transition point toward Lent and Easter, and we can look ahead to the journey of what is to come. I'm assuming the majority of us have been up on a mountain, maybe have had that opportunity to kind of look around and see your hike ahead and where you've come from. And those views up on the mountaintop are awe-inspiring, truly. Jesus' ministry on earth takes a turn at this point. Not only because he is transformed through his experience on the mountaintop with Elijah and Moses and God's voice, but also because he knows what is to come. They were, as the text says, discussing the exodus of Jesus. The beginning of the gospel reading today starts out by saying, "Now about 8 days after these sayings," this time period is foreshadowing the resurrection. And the thing that Jesus had said 8 days before were about predicting his passion. That is to come. There are so many pieces of the Transfiguration story that provides a glimmer of what is to come, from the sleeping disciples to Jesus praying to the white dazzling clothes. We are led to be transformed by this story, knowing that Jesus' ultimate transformation and ours is still to come as his journey begins for Jerusalem, the cross, and the resurrection. The resurrection of Christ is the biggest mystery of our faith. We proclaim it in our communion liturgy to ground us in the awe of God that provides transformation. The key to transformation in our lives is action. We must not just be awestruck and then keep God's greatness to ourselves. We must share the ways in which God's awe and wonder have transformed our lives so that others can be transformed too. The disciples weren't able to heal the boy because they weren't completely transformed by God. In our humanity, we won't ever be completely transformed like Jesus was either. But that doesn't mean that our experiences of faith and the beauty of God's greatness can't move us to changes and transformation like Jesus. We can turn from old ways to new. We can believe something, learn new information, and then start to believe something different. We can be wrong, forgive or apologize or both, and start again. There are ways in which we can be transfigured in our daily lives. As Christians, we will continually be transformed. If we think we've made it to the mountaintop and we're all set, that is where the trouble begins. We are all sinners and have fallen short of the glory of God. And this is why we have a communal confession each week. Because none of us is perfect, and because God's grace is so incredibly powerful and awe-inspiring. Every week I take in the words of the confession, and particularly this season of Epiphany's confession has really touched me. And yet, and they have been pretty tough to say aloud. And the thing about it is, it's because it's true. But in our confession, we receive God's grace, which again allows us to be awestruck by God and move us to be different. The awe of God's love for us should be so powerful in our lives that when it appears, we are moved towards transformation. The mystery of our faith is not meant to hold us back or limit us because we don't know all the answers. It's meant to push us forward into awe, wonder, and bold transformation. And all of this is truly the work of the church. To be together, to be restored, to be comforted with others in the mystery of faith, and surrounded and refreshed by God's love. And then be sent out to live our lives in a way that honors God, to show others the greatness of God, and have God's presence bring about awe too. This is what it means to be transformed. So I invite all of us to let the presence of God bring you awe to the point that it changes your life. Amen.